Good morning. We are in week 3 of rejection. And so last week we took a break and worked and reviewed um, Kirk Bennett's Bible meditation. So that was great last week and really set up the service well. So, but we're in this impromptu series. This is not a series we plan on going, but as we jumped in for a week of filler, the Lord just kind of blessed, and so we continue to go in here and work on understanding the spirits that kind of produce toxic behaviors and produce broken relationships and really keep us from being loved. And so we'll see that if the ultimate story of the scriptures is the love of God manifested in the death, burial, resurrection, and friendship of Jesus, then we have to understand that there's a brokenness in us, a broken part of us that struggles with being loved. And as we go through the scriptures, we see example after example of person who really reveals that as it builds to Jesus, who's gonna heal this problem. And so the endless and unsearchable and inexhaustible truth of Scripture is the love of God for us, because God is love. And so we struggle mightily with receiving that love because of our sin nature and the fallenness of us. So as we are going through this series, we're trying to discover first and foremost in our hearts, any rooms in our heart that rejection lingers in, that keeps our hearts from being able to fully embrace the love of Jesus. And we really want to wake up every morning and live every moment of our day under the power of God's love and aware of it. So God is present, but we don't always notice it. God is love, but we don't always receive it. And so really a lot of our assembling together and teaching and prayer is learning to host his presence and receive his love. And that's our challenge. And if we give up on that, then we just go get busy and we just kind of work and we cope with those realities kind of distant from us. So God is present, God is love. Let's host his presence and receive his love. So what is rejection? What is the spirit of rejection? It's a belief that causes a person to spurn affection and become toxically self-dependent. It produces toxic fruit and can eventually cede control to an orphan spirit. So when we talk about a spirit of rejection, when we use the word spirit, we're not always necessarily referring to a demonic spirit. We can refer to an attitude, an atmosphere, and or a demon. Someone can come in and change the atmosphere of the room with their presence before they ever say anything. When a leader walks in a room, it changes the atmosphere of a room. When a larger-than-life personality is there, it changes. When he's absent, you notice it. His spirit, his personality can change the room. And so there's an attitude, and there's also an atmosphere, and then there ultimately can be a demon. When someone is triggered, someone's being triggered, then we understand that triggering usually refers to an area where they don't have control in their heart. They don't have control, and so they are struggling with another spirit taking control in an area of their life. Luke 6:43 through 45 is a principle that we just really need to understand. I think two principles that we struggle with in the Christian life. We struggle with Ephesians 5, we wrestle not with flesh and blood, or Ephesians 6, we wrestle not with flesh and blood, but principalities. We often struggle with making a person the issue rather than the spirit behind it. Another thing we struggle with is this idea here, Luke 6:40 through 45. A good tree can't produce bad fruit, and a bad tree can't produce good fruit. So we don't want to let things lie. We don't want to let things rest. And we don't want to sweep things under the rug, because ultimately we are planting something that we don't want the fruit of. The roots of rejection bear fruits of rejection. So if I am rejected, David, my mother bore me in sin. In sin, my mother bore me. And in iniquity was I conceived. David's rejection in his birth ultimately leads to him rejecting Absalom, leads to all sorts of separation. But we'll get to David later. This morning, we're looking at the Israelites. So we saw this in the life of Joseph, right? We saw Abraham and Sarah rejecting Hagar, rejecting a son in Ishmael. We saw choosing a favorite in Isaac. Understandably, in some, right, you can justify some of it, but ultimately they made a decision to have a child and they rejected the child. So this is a evil decision. Then we see that bearing fruit. We see Isaac having a favorite son, and that causes incredible rejection. We see Jacob, that favorite son, having all sorts of rejection issues, being rejected by Jacob was the favorite son of Rebekah, and so we see him struggling with rejection from his father Isaac. We see him having his favorite son Joseph and rejecting his other 11 sons, or the 10 sons at the time. Benjamin came later. And then that family grows into a nation, and that nation is rejected by the Egyptians. That nation's going to bear a child who's going to be rejected by the world. That's Jesus. Okay? But we're going to talk about that nation that's the family of Jacob that's grown into a nation and now has been expelled or delivered from Egypt after the Passover. They have this mentality. And so what we're really going to look at is kind of the fruits of rejection in this lesson this morning. And we're going to see how when we're living under rejection, it's a slave mentality. And they are unable to feel love. They're unable to enter into a relationship. And so they live under law. I think one of the saddest things that's been pointed out, and I'm probably stealing my own thunder from later in the lesson, is that when God calls them to a relationship with him, they reject the Lord and say, we will do what Moses tells us to do. Moses, you go have a relationship, and then you tell us what to do. So they don't want to be loved. They just want to follow the law. And so then the law comes. They had an opportunity to live in a relationship with Yahweh, but they reject it. Moses brings it back up again in Deuteronomy, and then it's brought back up again in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, when Paul says, don't reject the voice of the Lord like the Israelites did in their idolatry and complaining. They rejected the voice of the Lord and basically told Moses, we just want to follow what you have to say. So rejection prevented them from entering into the loving relationship that they could have had with Yahweh, and instead they keep him at a distance. And this is really the spirit of rejection, is distance. Now, someone may have a great personality. They may have found ways to compensate for that spirit of rejection so that when you meet them, their personality and countenance and spirit makes you think that they are lovable or they are loving. But ultimately, when you get close to them and you get to a place of intimacy where there is a vulnerability and a sharing of emotion, you find a wall because they're unable to receive any further. And so they push away. And the whole nation of Israel has this kind of look when they leave in Exodus. Okay, introductory statement first. Our outlook on life is determined by the spirit that we listen to. Our outlook on life is determined by the spirit that we listen to. So you're going to see right away this that the Israelites are not listening to the voice of the Lord, but there's some other voice at play in this account. So, for the children of Israel, it wasn't too long after the Red Sea parting before their negative perspective began to be revealed. Sounds like this week was time change week for the kids, right? Feels like that? It's a lot of noise. My daughter's joining in the trio, I think. So, there's this amazing account of them getting through the Red Sea, turning around and worshiping the Lord in Exodus 15. You have this beautiful song of deliverance, right, in Exodus 15. And then it ends with them complaining and being angry at Moses and being bitter. So there's an amazing shift that takes place all in the same chapter. We're rejoicing over victory, and then we're bitter. God delivered us, and he parted the Red Sea, and he kept us from being slaughtered, but he probably can't provide healthy drinking water for us. Like there's this inability to be grateful and to maintain that gratitude or turn that gratitude into hope and into faith. And you're going to see this as a theme. When we have despair on us, we have this negative voice in us that we listen to, then no matter how many victories we have in our past, we have this unbelief and hopelessness in front of us. Like we can't possibly get through the next hurdle. And so you can look at people and say, look what God has done, and they just can't receive it, and they can't look forward. And you see that in relationships to make it less spiritual, maybe a little more practical. You can look at somebody who's been loved and cared for by many people around them, but because of an instance of rejection or because of a few instances of rejection, they're unable to notice the love that's around them and unable to look forward with hope for a future healthy relationship. So it's not long till we see the negative perspective of these Israelites. So letter A, this negative perspective is born from a life of despair. This negative perspective is born from a life of despair. In other words, the nation of Israel really needed a prayer room. And they needed some talking. Did you ever experience any physical abuse? Well, yeah, there was that one time every day of my life where I was beaten and made to build the pyramids, okay? And so, okay, we need to do forgiveness. Who do we need to forgive? The entire nation of Egypt, every taskmaster. You bring a lady in. Is there anything you need to forgive? Yeah, they murdered my baby boys. Right? I mean, these are some intense experiences that they've gone through, intense wounds. And So with the killing of the children that Moses, so narrowly escaped the sovereign protection of God, divine protection, but the killing of the baby boys, the intensifying of the slavery, intensifying of the abuse and torture on them, we see incredible brokenness that's in the spirit of these people. And so we can be really hard on them, right? You can read this and I'm guilty of it. I'm sure I'll probably make a mistake of going that way again here later in the lesson. But you can be really tough on these people. Like, God delivered you. You're okay. But if you're a mom and dad Israelite, if you're the 37-year-old, like many of us in our mid-30s with little kids, your entire life, you'd grown up under slavery. You had seen incredible amounts of murder and chaos. And so you would have had all these just terrible experiences. And now you're trying to take care of your kids in the middle of a wilderness with, you got a lot of gold, but it doesn't really help you in the middle of a wilderness, okay? It's going to help you build the tabernacle, but it's not going to help you eat real well. There's no market you can go and buy food. And so there's just an incredible amount of circumstances that they could be afraid of or even find despair in. So this negative perspective is born from a life of despair. And we've had this, we encounter this, and as we minister to people and love people, we're going to find people whose lives are marked with despair, marked with brokenness. And the love of Christ has got to break through, and it can. It can. We see the love of Christ break through with a man born blind, with lepers, people who are in the midst of just daily suffering and despair. An encounter with Jesus changes everything. So we know that Jesus can change everything. But we have this long, very detailed look at this group of people to show us the mindset of a person who's in bondage so that we can begin to understand what's needed as we minister in the love of Jesus. Along with that next letter B, they didn't know how to they didn't know how to hope or to be free. They did not know how to hope or to be free. Ultimately, it's revealed that they don't know how to be loved. And so as the Lord loves them and delivers them and cares for them, they don't trust him for tomorrow. They can't thank him for yesterday. They're complaining about today, and they don't trust him about tomorrow. They have this outlook of despair and an outlook of unbelief. There's a lot more at play here than just rejection. But this theme of despair, this theme of hopelessness kind of lies over them as you see all of their actions. We see this at the end of their journey, of these adults, over 20, when they send in 12 spies, right? 12 men went to spy in Canaan, 10 were bad and 2 were good. And so, that's all I can remember right now. And so the 12 go in and they come out. And we see the overwhelming majority of people believe like the 10, and very few believe like the 2. In fact, the only 2 that are spared are Joshua and Caleb. We see the spirit of Joshua and Caleb standing in stark contrast to the spirit of these 10 spies. The 2, Joshua and Caleb, had hope, faith, and understand that God would bring them through this. He brought them this far for a purpose, and his ultimate promise was not yet fulfilled. Right? So what an important reminder for us that when we're in the middle of the waiting, we always want to look back at what God has done and understand that he's not done. Right? In the middle of the waiting, we realize he's working. He began a good work, and he will complete it. He'll perform it to its completion. And so the two, Caleb and Joshua, understood that. Look, he didn't bring us out of Egypt, do the whole Passover thing, part the Red Sea, give us the sweet waters of Elim and the rock of Horeb. Well, the rock of Horeb came later. But he didn't give us water from a rock, and it hasn't been a pillar of cloud by day and pillar of fire by night just to bring us to a massacre in Canaan land. He promised this land to our ancestor Abraham. Abraham's not going to get that promise if we go in and all die. So clearly, he's going to give us this land. Right? So Caleb and Joshua understand the promise of God, and they have hope in the miracles that God's about to do. Unfortunately, about to do means 40-year wait, because they're going to wander for a little while the other adults who don't believe die off. The 10 lacked hope. They saw the obstacles as a repeat of their past, one where they would be subdued and broken, living in submission and despair. This is the beat-down, broken spirit the enemy wants us to live in. One where we simply cannot believe that a loving God will want what's best for us. And so there's a despondency that we see among the 10 and overall the spirit of all the adults among the Israelites. So we'll revisit that, but we're going to go back a little earlier too, right after they've gone through the Red Sea. Next, we see they had unhealthy dependence on leadership. An unhealthy dependence on leadership. They wanted to follow, but did not want responsibility. And so we see them draining Moses. Exodus chapter 18. Exodus chapter 18, verses 13 to 14. The next day, Moses took his seat to hear the people's disputes against each other, and they waited before him from morning till evening. When Moses' father-in-law saw all that Moses was doing for the people, he asked, "What are you really accomplishing here? Why are you trying to do all this alone while everyone stands before you from morning till evening?" So we see them all just kind of dependent on Moses. Moses has set it up this way, which is unhealthy. And we see them just bringing constant disputes. And I don't think Moses is really fixing anything. I think he's refereeing something that is just never-ending. And we see this unhealthy dependence right after the Red Sea parting. In Exodus 15, the people, verse 24, the people complained and turned against Moses. "What are we going to drink?" they demanded. So again, they're not praying. They're just yelling at Moses. There's this unhealthy dependence on leadership. And you see this often in different circles. We see this in different churches. When people are living under rejection and really don't actually have much faith, they participate in faith things like singing and preaching and church assembly, but they don't actually pray for themselves, don't actually do any spiritual growing themselves. Their dependence and connection is solely on whoever the leader is, on the pastor, or sometimes the leader in the church isn't the pastor, and they have an unhealthy dependence on that one leader. And so, or it can be someone in their family, and they're unhealthily tied to the patriarch of the family. And so they're unable to move forward in their personal freedom and move forward in their Christian walk because of this unhealthy dependence. When Moses disappears, what happens? They get afraid, they make a new Moses and Aaron, and they make Aaron form a god they can see in the golden calf. In Exodus, that's later on. So they have this unhealthy dependence. Yet, even though they have this unhealthy dependence, they don't trust the leadership. And so you'll definitely see this dynamic in marriages where there's an unhealthy dependence and a lack of trust. Do this for me, I can't do this without you, also I don't trust you. And I don't think you love me. And so the spirit of rejection causes an unhealthy soul tie where it's not a bond in the love of Christ, but it's a bond of manipulation, sometimes codependence, a bond that is draining one person for the sake of another person who's being more of a parasite than a helpmeet or loving them like Jesus loved the church. So they have an unhealthy dependence, but they don't trust the same person they're depending on. Manipulation and control are at play in this toxic situation. And ultimately, they break this very healthy leader. Like, one of the greatest leaders of all time is Moses, and he breaks. He's done. And it's sad. When I read Numbers, like Numbers 11, it says that Moses was aggravated with the people, and the Lord was angry with the people. Like, Moses is having the same emotions that the Lord is having. But ultimately, he goes to that rock and just says, cotton pick, and he hits that rock, and that's it. He doesn't get to go into the promised land. And just as a human being, right? If you've read the story and you've paid attention at all, your heart goes out to Moses. You're like, really, Lord? Like, you wanted to kill him, and Moses changed your mind, and now, and so you see this difficult situation where the people have kind of broken their human leader, and I think it has to happen so that Moses isn't worshipped. It has to happen to show us how Jesus is greater. And there's many situations, obviously, where Moses is shown as a flawed man, but he's broken here by this unhealthy spirit that these people have placed on him. Numbers 11, I want to read that, just reference that. Verses 10 through 15. Moses heard all the families standing in the doorways of their tents whining, and the Lord became extremely angry, and Moses was also very aggravated. It's quite a verse. And Moses said to the Lord, why are you treating me, your servant, so harshly? Have mercy on me. What did I do to deserve the burden of all these people? Did I give birth to them? Did I bring them in the world? Why did you tell me to carry them in my arms like a mother carries a nursing baby? How can I carry them to land you swore to give their ancestors? Where am I supposed to get meat for all these people? They keep whining to me, saying, give us meat to eat. I can't carry all these people by myself. The load is far too heavy. If this is how you intend to treat me, just go ahead and kill me. Do me a favor and spare me this misery. And that's not a burned out leader, right? God, you said you were going to bring them, and you're making me carry them like a nursing mom. I can't nurse 2 million people. And I'm tired of this. If this is the way it's going to be, I want to die now. That's a pretty intense. By the way, in the next chapter, he marries another woman, so that's just another story. Unhealthy leaders find a second wife, apparently. And so that's a leadership lesson that someone should address. We've seen that in the American church world as well. I don't think anything's right. Something's wrong with that pastor. Next thing you know, he left his wife and got another one. Okay, now we know there was something definitely wrong. And Moses does the same thing, but culturally it's okay here. And Aaron and Miriam find that out the hard way. So their toxic spirit breaks this otherwise healthy leader. Next, the fruit of rejection. They allow unqualified outside voices to inform their opinions. They allow unqualified outside voices to inform their opinions. It's always a facepalm moment when you're doing marriage counseling or whatever, and the person you're counseling tells you, well, so-and-so told me this, right? And the person that gave them that advice is divorced or unhappily married. You want to be like, right, like, well, okay, I mean, but hold on. You know, they're going through their own thing. They're not in a happy, healthy relationship right now. You know, we're not holding their past against them, but they're probably not qualified to give you advice at this season of their life. So why are you bringing that advice in? You know, and why is that outside voice allowed? You know what I read on Facebook, Pastor? We should do this in our church. It's like, well, I appreciate that. I'm not sure Facebook's the most qualified voice, or the blogger is the most qualified voice. Somebody who used to go to our church sends me a heresy hunter book in the mail every month. It's usually around whatever we're talking about. And so we did the Enneagram marriage series, and about a week later, I got a book on what's wrong with the Enneagram. And I've gotten a lot of books on what's wrong with over pursuing spiritual gifts. And so someone just sends, here's this person, here's a critic, and I sent you an anonymous book in the mail. So I think that if you're watching, you can save your money and cancel that subscription. And so there's the outside voice. The outside voice. We believe in the priesthood of the believer, but we're always willing to give comment and critique on other ministries or other people that we don't have business commenting on. And we want to be careful about this. So where does this come from? Well, Numbers 11:4. Numbers 11:4, the Bible says that then the foreign rabble, Moses did not have a high opinion of these people, he calls them rabble. Then the foreign rabble who were traveling with the Israelites began to crave the good things of Egypt. So people have come in who are not Israelites, and they're traveling with them because it's quite a miracle. And they're eating manna with them. They're tasting of the glory, but they have no part with them as far as the Jewish culture. And so they've kind of just been fans, going through these victories and seeing these amazing miracles, but now things have gotten kind of tough. Like manna was really good the first week, but here we are. It's been a little while. We'd like to eat some meat. And so they begin to stir up this spirit. And so these outside voices stir it up. And so I used to think it was just for teenagers to tell people to be careful of who their friends were, but I'm finding out it's for adults as well. Like, we need to be careful who our friends are. Be careful who we're listening to. Be careful who influences us. The outside voice that is often the loudest is often the most unqualified. And the still small voice of the Spirit usually doesn't come through the loud mouth who is toxic in his own life and who is giving bad advice. So they allow unqualified outside voices to inform their opinions. So now this whole nation is stirred up by this outside rabble, foreign rabble, as it's translated here in the NLT. And so I've seen churches split because of outside voices. And so someone who's not a part of the church, who has no part in the church, just all of a sudden their voice influences a church, and that ministry is over because of outside voices, unqualified outside voices. It's not a church growth expert or a coach who helps pastors. It's just some person who read a book and maybe had a year of Bible college in their past, and now they're splitting a ministry because, well, they had a loud voice. So this there's going to be thousands of people, I think 23,000, that are going to die because of the influence of these outside voices. And so it's a significant event there in their history. So when we are under rejection, we can't trust the person who loves us, so we become attracted to that outside voice. Oftentimes, the outsider is rejected themselves. This foreign rabble, why are they with the Israelites? Because wherever they're from doesn't want them anymore. Right? Wherever they're from doesn't exist anymore. So they've been rejected, and now they're producing rejection in the people that they're with. Next, then, their recollection of their experiences in Egypt began to shift. Their recollection of their experiences in Egypt began to shift. They want to go back to their bondage. A couple statements that are that, several subpoints there. They made exaggerated statements, letter A, in order to insult and complain. They made exaggerated statements in order to insult and complain. So, trying to keep this practical as we go through this kind of spiritual overview of their attitude. So I've got these four exaggerated categories of statements. Have you ever seen these in a relationship? The never always complaint, the perfect and useless comparison, the blame game, and this just overall melodramatic statements. Okay? So the never always complaint. Are you ready? We never were without food in Egypt. We always had unlimited onions and cucumbers and blood coming out of our backs from whips. But we always, right? Never always. Never always. You never do this for me. I always have to take care of this myself. You never help me. I always have to do this, right? Never always, which ultimately is melodrama, but, never always. Perfect and useless. The food in Egypt was perfect. This manna is useless. I'm so sick and tired of this. What's a coriander seed? To describe manna, they call it coriander seed. I don't know what coriander seed is either, so it's something. I think of vanilla wafers, right? Vanilla wafers, manna. That's probably what it was, right? Fantastic. And I don't know if I could have a steady diet of vanilla wafers, but the full soul loatheth the honeycomb. That's in Proverbs, and I'm sure that's what they were experiencing. But perfect and useless, right? So imperfect and useless, when you're under the spirit of rejection, you usually portray yourself as the perfect one, and the person trying to love you is useless, right? And so these are big statements. You never, no one loves me. Nobody cares. Nobody understands. I've heard that. No one understands what I'm feeling right now. I think so. I think somebody understands. Your specific set of circumstances may be unique to you, but each circumstance you're facing, someone else has already faced. Right? So we could get 3 or 4 people in a room, and we'd find that there's 3 or 4 people who together understand everything you're experiencing. But most people are unwilling to get in that room because it makes for tough conversations. It's awkward. You got to be vulnerable and intimate. Until you do have spirit of rejection, they're not going to do that. So no one understands how I feel. That's a never always complaint. The blame game. Blame game. Moses, it's your fault that we don't have meat. How's this Moses' fault? Did Moses part the Red Sea? Does Moses make manna rain? Does Moses bring water from a rock? How's this Moses' fault? Well, remember, they don't want to talk to God. They just want to talk to Moses. So this unhealthy dependence on leadership, this is your fault. God brought us here. No, it's your fault, Moses. So the blame game. Blame never gets anybody anywhere. All right? If you're in a relation, in your marriage, in your family, helping your kids get through an argument, if you hear blame, you just got to stop it. We don't blame each other here. Okay? We take personal responsibility. We don't blame other people for our situation. Blame is a useless, inflammatory tactic that the enemy uses to escalate things that are usually small. Right? Husband and wife can be having a nice conversation, and then something can be triggered, and blame comes out, and then it's just a volcano, right? It's an explosion of anger and a fiery tempest that takes place. Why? Because blame came in the situation. I see a lot of couples right now nodding their heads, so I should park there a while, Pastor. And then melodrama. And just melodrama is just these huge, dramatic statements. So Exodus 14, going back and forth between Exodus and Numbers. Exodus 14. Verse 10. As Pharaoh approached, the people of Israel looked up. They panicked when they saw the Egyptians. They cried out to the Lord, and they said to Moses, "Why did you bring us out here to die in the wilderness?" It's very dramatic. "Weren't there enough graves for us in Egypt?" Extra drama. "What have you done to us? Why did you make us leave Egypt? Didn't we tell you this would happen while we were still in Egypt? We said, 'Leave us alone. Let us be slaves to Egyptians. It's better to be a slave in Egypt than a corpse in the wilderness.'" Right? This is just drama. We see this in prayer rooms sometimes. Someone just kind of tries to. They want to do. The enemy oftentimes will try to shock the person who's trying to help them with these dramatic statements. So the person will get discouraged and say, "Oh, you're right. I can't help you. You're right. We are going to die. Let's go surrender to the Egyptians. All right, we're done. You're right." And so it's just a tactic of the enemy to just blow everything up. And so you really have to be secure with the Lord. Say, okay, none of that's true. The Lord did not deliver us from Egypt so that we die out here in the wilderness. It's not better to be a slave. We want something better for our kids than another generation of slavery. We still have the promise of Abraham, who's going to have this beautiful land. We want to become a nation. We agreed to this. The voice of reason, which Moses doesn't give. He just parts the Red Sea, and that blows everything up. So that's great. And so we see this melodrama. Letter B. Their slave mentality caused them simply to switch masters. Their slave mentality caused them simply to switch masters. To Moses in Exodus 15:24, they say, "What are we going to drink?" And so now they're just looking for someone else to spoon feed them and care for them. We will do what Moses tells us to do. They could not move into relationship with the mindset that they had. In Exodus 20, this is found in Exodus 20, verse 19. I think it's a critical point when we look at the spirit of religion as well. They said to Moses, "You speak to us and we will listen, but don't let God speak directly to us, or we will die." And I think even the church today, many churches are still saying, God doesn't speak. Don't let God speak. He speaks to the pastor. He only speaks through the Bible. The Holy Spirit, he just makes Bible verses glow brighter, but he doesn't speak. Don't listen to the voice of God. And so this is a law-based decision. As soon as they make this decision, they're going to live under law. So from then on, they have rejected the voice of God. It's interesting that they are rejected, and now they're rejecting the one who loves them, the voice of love. In Hebrews chapter 12, it deals with this. If you want to turn there, Hebrews chapter 12, and we're going to look at verses 18 through 25. Hebrews 12:18. You've not come to a physical mountain, to a place of flaming fire, darkness, gloom, and whirlwind. Verse 19, for they heard an awesome trumpet blast and a voice so terrible they begged God to stop speaking. They staggered back under God's command. Moses himself, verse 21, was so frightened at the sight, he said, I am terrified and trembling. Verse 25, be careful that you do not refuse to listen to the one who is speaking. For if the people of Israel did not escape when they refused to listen to Moses, the earthly messenger, we will certainly not escape if we reject the one who speaks to us from heaven. So, this rejection, we do not want to let rejection cause us to be unable to listen to the voice of God. It is only when rejection is dealt with and our spirit is healed that we can hear the voice of God. So, if we're going to church, we've got the Bible, we're listening to preachers, preaching, Christian music, all that, if we haven't dealt with the spirit of rejection, then ultimately we're going to really struggle in our quiet time in hearing God's voice. One primary reason that in our devotions we get discouraged and we quit in having a dialogue with God, we quit in having a fruitful prayer life, it's because we've not dealt with rejection in our hearts. And so we listen to the voice that says that God doesn't want to talk to you. God talks to pastors, he talks to the mystics, he talks to apostles, but he doesn't talk to you. And that is the voice of rejection. That is the spirit, demon spirit, not attitude, not atmosphere, demon spirit of rejection, telling you that God is rejecting you. But God's voice is available to all believers who allow him to come in and invade every room in their heart and clear out all the cobwebs and all the skeletons that are in the closets of our hearts so that we can hear his voice and walk in intimacy with him. So it's not that you haven't read the right book on how to listen to the voice of God, although there's some great ones out there. It's often that there's spirits that are dominating that frequency, telling you on the same frequency where he's trying to speak. They're telling you on that frequency, he is unwilling to speak to you, and they're causing rejection. It's like when you're listening to that favorite worship song, and then that radio test, emergency signal test comes over the radio, which is like, do we still need that with our phones? Or maybe you're listening on your phone, and you get an Amber Alert on your phone, right? And it gets interrupted, okay? And so what you want to hear is interrupted by some obnoxious and loud voice. And that's what the spirit of rejection does if we try to listen to the voice of God. It comes in, it overrides that frequency, and makes us believe that God doesn't want to speak to us. It'll accuse God, or it'll accuse us. And we see the Israelites experiencing both, accusing God or being accused themselves, and both times unable to listen to God. The root of rejection produces the fruit of rejection because they rejected God's voice. The Israelites did. Let us see, ultimately, they tried to go back into bondage. And so rejection is going to bring them right back to the source that rejected them. And this is a sad situation. We'll see this oftentimes in a prayer room with someone who grew up in an abusive home. The abuser, which percentage-wise, unfortunately, most often is the dad, in my experiences that I've dealt with in the prayer rooms. And then the mom who holds it all together. And the mom's a hero, and the dad's an abuser, serial physical abuser, not one instance, but over and over again. In the mind of the person, of the child, who's usually grown up now, an adult, mom's a hero because she endured that. And we often have to get them to see that they need to forgive their mom for subjecting them over and over again to the atmosphere of abuse. Mom probably grew up in a very strict environment where you're not allowed to leave for any reason. And so because of the strict religious environment, she has to stay, but she continues to subject her children to serial abuse she knows about. She's oftentimes a victim herself, and so she's so broken and battered and manipulated and controlled and hurt that she's unable to see that she needs to leave. And so we're not trying to condemn or cause someone to dishonor their parents, but we often have to show them that there's forgiveness that is that's needed here, because there's a return to bondage. There was a security in that bondage. It was better that we stay here with what we're familiar with and we strike out in the unknown. Despite all the social programs that we have in America to take care and help someone who might be struggling, there's a fear and a deception in their own lives that keeps them returning to bondage. So they'd leave. Did your mom ever leave? Yeah. And then she came back. And what happened when she came back? It was better for a week, and then it got worse. It was better for a month, and it got worse. And there's this return, and there's this cycle that happens. And it's just one of the awful bullying tactics of the enemy is that he beats us up, and then he draws us back in, manipulating us to beat us up again. That's a terrible, terrible, terrible thing. When we set people free without discovering and eliminating the root of their bondage, we find they eventually go back into greater bondage. Jesus teaches this when he says, don't clean and sweep the room and leave it empty. Right? The room is going to be is left empty when that reason of bondage, that root of the bondage, the cause of it, is not rooted out, not taken care of. So you can eliminate the spirits, but this room exists because of some awful event or some root. And so unless we deal with it, they're going to come back. So helping someone with drug addiction or pornography addiction or whatever addiction they may have, and not showing and helping them understand that a lot of this comes out of feeling unloved, being the sibling who wasn't favored, or feeling that the sibling wasn't favored because of just trying to cope with situations they were in. If we just deal with the fruit issue, then we're going to keep getting the fruit, right? You can pick all the apples from an apple tree, but next year you're going to have more apples. So it's not we're dealing with all the fruit. Okay, no more drugs. And then why'd they go back to drugs? Because we didn't cut the tree down that produced this fruit of addiction. So ultimately, the Israelites try to go back to bondage. And how does this end? This ends tragically. All the people who try to go back into bondage die. Right? Happy Sunday, boys and girls. This is a Bible story. And we'll see in a few minutes. Right? This is a tough situation. They all die. So they try to go back to bondage. They get to the very border. And some of them even go inside of the promised land. They are delivered. God brings them where he brought them, where he said he would bring them. And he says, you can have this. And the other side are the biggest grapes you've ever seen. 2 guys to carry a cluster of grapes. This is the greatest land. This is a land which flows. The rivers have milk, right? The seas have honey. This is amazing. This is paradise. But they can't go. And they want to return to bondage, and so they die in the wilderness. So, we see this. We talk about the drug problem in our community and in America as a whole. We see people who maybe get free for a little while and then they return. We've had people several years ago. We had a member of our church and he brought a relative. We sent a relative to a rehab facility, and next thing you know, about 2 months later, he'd been clean, and then another week passed, and I got a call and they said he's passed away. And I said, did he die at the facility? No, he came back and he took just went on a binge and now he's passed away. He's overdosed. But that tragic story of someone who returned to bondage. And ultimately, he lost his life because sin was finished, bringing forth death. When we think of sin, we're thinking of these actions, these fruits. But the root of sin is that spirit of iniquity. That spirit of iniquity is spirits like rejection. And if we don't deal with those, then we're not going to be able. We're just combating the fruit all the time. Numbers 14. The whole community began weeping aloud, verse 1, and they cried all night. Their voices rose in a great chorus of protest against Moses and Aaron. If only we had died in Egypt, or even here in the wilderness, they complained. And what'd they get? They spoke it out. If only we died in Egypt, or maybe we just die in the wilderness. And the Lord said, okay. And why, verse 3, is the Lord taking us to this country only to have us die in battle? Our wives and our little ones will be carried off as a plunder. Wouldn't it be better for us to return to Egypt? Then they plotted among themselves, let's choose a new leader and let's go back to Egypt. So ultimately, they tried to go back into bondage. Their attitude of going back brought about death. This is the Old Testament's version of an overdose. Someone set free cannot handle the freedom and eventually pays the ultimate price. Then last main point, number 7, they became reckless consumers rather than gracious caretakers. Reckless consumers rather than gracious caretakers. This is just a fruit of this rejection. Again, they're taking from the greatest leader ever and they're breaking him. Not able to follow or build him up. They're consuming. We see this with the story of the quail in Numbers 11, 31 to 34. Right? The Lord finally gives them meat, and they take the meat, and they are grabbing it out of the air. The Bible says it was, I think, 3 cubits. They're coming down to 3 or 4 cubits in the air. So 54 inches. You've got 16 to 18 inches. So somewhere between 50 and 54 inches, you've got quail flying down. So people are snatching them out of the air and starting to eat them, just ripping the wings off and starting to eat the quail right out of the air and consuming it without cooking it. And so thousands die and are judged. So this is just a picture, though, of their spirit of consuming and lack of gratitude. And so you see this with this just kind of mentality of just not taking care of what we have, not taking care of what we're given. It shows a lack of gratitude. And often that lack of gratitude is fostered in a spirit that's just not loved. They don't understand love. They don't understand a gift from someone who loves them, right? When you love someone truly and they give you a gift, you value it. When you don't love that person, you don't understand what it's like to be loved, they give you a gift, it's trashed. And it's just this spirit that's behind it. This, I think, ultimately, the story is why Moses later strikes the rock. They're angry, and they're taking this quail, and some of their behavior here actually is mimicked later by Moses, when he strikes the rock and deals with his own rejection from the people that he's leading. The last 2 lessons I gave you solutions, right? The first lesson we talked about Jesus. Jesus is a solution to rejection. And this whole story is building up to, out of this people, this stubborn and a stiff-necked people, is going to come the Lion from the tribe of Judah. And he is going to be their healing. He's going to be despised and rejected, like Moses was, but he's going to allow himself to be smitten. And will turn the other cheek, right? He will seek not his own, but he'll allow himself to be smitten, and he will surrender to their rejection and surrender to the sin and iniquity and burdens that they place on him, that the Father places on him through them. And so we see that Jesus is the answer. We also see faith and forgiveness in the answers in rejection part 2. That when we are dealing with a people like this and the despair they've gone through, then they really need to turn and forgive those who have abused them, forgive those who have hurt them. And I think I would add to this one that there needs to be hope. When you look at the story of the Israelites in the wilderness, though they have this paradise in front of them, they are hopeless. They have military victories in the wilderness. If you read through the story of Numbers, before they get to Jericho, before they get to the Promised Land, they've already won some battles. And so God has shown them that he can use this group of people to win battles. And yet when they get to the Jordan River, they refuse to go forward because they think they're going to die in battle. And so they don't believe in God's ability to care for them. So as we're helping people through rejection and maybe dealing with elements of our heart that struggle with rejection, we need to be grateful for what God has done and hopeful in what he will do. And as we keep gratitude and hope together, then we will be able to be freed from that voice that wants to bring us into despair and bring us into believing that we are not worth it, that we're not loved, that we're not special. And I would say then also, let us be sure that we're leaning into the voice of God and not letting the spirit of rejection drown his voice out, because he wants to speak to each of us.